Now,
Got it.
okay, we're in good shape. Hi, I'm Linda Lambert, and today I am interviewing the other person you see on the screen, Carla Shafer, a longtime poet who contributed a couple of poems to the Spring and All anthology, the one that's written and edited by Red Wheelbarrow Writers and published by Sidekick Press. One of her poems is called Spring, and the other bears the interesting title, Psalm 100, illuminated for people living near the Salish Sea. And here's what the book looks like. I don't know if you've seen
Book.
We have, but it's about to be published, so we're very happy about that. I've always liked your poetry, and
Thanks, Linda.
I especially like the one that is based off of the Psalm. And I happen to have a really lovely book that my wife gave me called Book of Psalms.
Ah.
And
do you know that your picture has disappeared? There, it's back.
That's not good. Disappearing picture. I don't like that.
No,
I would rather look at you, but oh well.
Well, I like seeing us here together.
Anyway, so this book is one that I really like. I don't know what version of the 100th Psalm you used.
I used the Revised Standard.
Revised Standard version.
The new Revised Standard, NRSV.
Yeah, the new Revised Standard. So this is probably a little different, but it helped me get accustomed, or refresh my mind about your poem. And yeah. I'm really interested as to why you had that idea to use it as a base.
I was meeting with a group of writers. We meet once a year in November for about 3 or 4 days. And somebody had the idea that you could rewrite Psalm 100. Well, lots of people have had the ideas you can rewrite everything in the Bible.
Oh, yes, yes.
Proverbs, everything. And so we all tried it. And I thought it sounded like an impossible task. Psalm 100, is make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And as far as I was concerned, that said about everything, put it in a tight little package. And but then I just took the verb, that begins each line in that translation, and I was off and running. The poem was writing itself. And we were out at on the Olympic Peninsula, and we were in this bay where the seagulls were having fits because there was a run of herring, and they were all coming in to get the herring, but so were the seals and some sea lions, the big ones. Are they? What do we have in the Sound besides?
I don't know, but the big sea lions will do.
The big, they were. And it was very noisy because the seagulls were dive bombing the seals. And
they can be so noisy, those seagulls.
Yes. And then the bigger seals were catching a seagull every once in a while and drawing it down in the water. And meanwhile, the fish were jumping like crazy trying to get away. So it made the first line of the poem easy to come up with. Make a joyful noise, like bark. Well, make a bark like the seal.
I thought that was such an interesting way to start.
Yeah, well,
kind of turned my head.
It comes right out of your body, the seal's bark. It's a very full-bodied experience. And what could be better when you're trying to be joyful? Just bark like a seal.
Well, I'm certainly pleased with it. I hope God is pleased with it. And and obviously the Red Wheelbarrow writers and editors were pleased with it. So I think you have a winner here. Poetry isn't about winning, but it is about resonance and sound and sense, and you have all of that in this poem.
Well, thank you for noticing. It was fun to write, and it's been interesting to share it.
It's kind of nice when something is fun to write. There are a lot of times when it's arduous, and when it's too laborious, it's usually, at least I find, it's not usually right.
Right. Yeah. If you have to try too hard, you probably should wait and try again later.
Yeah, turn off your computer, put away your pad and pencil, and wait. And maybe you'll still use that same phrase, but maybe you'll change it just a little bit, or
Right.
put it somewhere else. And you just have to find out what happens. How have you been writing poems forever?
Not really. But I've been writing them for 40 years.
Well, that's
Or
close
maybe
to
45.
that's a good part of your life, isn't it?
Over half.
Glad to hear it.
Probably since I was 30. I've always known about poetry, and I've read a lot, and I may have tried my hand at a few in college. But my professor at where I went to college at Lewis and Clark was William Stafford.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I was really intimidated to write any poetry
Sure.
with him. But he was always extremely kind and suggested that it would be fine if we tried. Not, don't give yourself a hard time. That's basically his whole story. So then after I graduated, I was able to go to a couple of his workshops. One of the poets there was Naomi Shihab Nye, who
Oh, you really had good exposure.
right, who he said, Carla, you can't be in my workshop group, but I'm putting you with Naomi. And she's my favorite poet. And I thought, well, okay.
All right.
Sounded like real safety to me. I didn't have to bare my soul to William Stafford, but I could do it with somebody that he likes a lot. So
Well, that was a few years ago.
yeah, that was about 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And so, what did you major in?
oh, well, I majored in English, literature, and education, but it was 1962 to 66. And all of English literature was written by men, except
I
Carla.
graduated in English in 1964. So
Yeah.
yes, I know.
And it didn't occur to me until sometime later that quite a few of them were still alive. And so then I realized that I really needed to go look these guys up if I wanted to know some poets and hear them. But it was a good liberal arts college, so we had poets on campus, and
Yeah.
we're encouraged to think about whatever we could do ourselves. But I was going into education. I wanted to teach. And I did teach some, but I ended up doing other things.
What, just out of curiosity, as a side
Yeah.
note, what did you teach? What level, and what were the
Oh,
other things you did?
well, I taught high school juniors one year,
Oh,
and that was in Seattle. And that was great fun. And I would have stayed, but I got married, and my husband had a graduate program in Buffalo, New York.
oh,
So uprooted ourselves, and I taught inner city junior high school in Buffalo, New York.
oh,
2 years.
that's got to be an education in itself.
It was so much fun. If you want to learn about racism in America, learn it from seventh graders.
Yeah.
It's right on their shirt sleeves, they're like it's in their faces.
How did you navigate that situation? What did you learn? Did you write any poems about it? That's 3 questions in a row, way too
It
many.
is. I might have written a short story or two, but and I don't have many poems about it really, but I have they would just come and they would ask direct questions like, how come it matters that Sammy's so black now, and that's a good thing, where last year he was made fun of? And I'm like, well, let me tell you what I know about that, which is, of
Mhm.
course, almost nothing. But to reinterpret it then right on the ground with the kids and help them see that it was a fair question and that it could be answered in lots of ways. And the best one was to include everybody. But they had some pretty good understanding. They would come to me and say, well, we're all the same on the inside, Ms. Johnson. And I'm like, I've been taught that since early childhood. But to have kids who I knew were being oppressed and discriminated against in every way tell
Mhm.
me that they were all the same on the inside, that we are all the same, was, well, it was physically, emotional, and intellectually changing, life changing. So that's how it was to be with them.
But you started doing things other than teaching.
Well, yeah, it was the 70s when we got back to Washington State and there were no jobs available. So I went into community action and I worked with farm workers down in Oregon.
Oh,
Yeah, so that was great fun. And then I came up to Bellingham again, tried it for a job and got work with Bellingham Community Childcare for Low Income Families. It's the one by the hospital.
yes.
Yeah. And did that for 10 years while my kids were growing up. And then because I was able to get a master's in early childhood administration, and because we'd been fundraising with the Lummi people on having a casino to raise money for childcare,
Mm.
that I knew 4 of the 5 board members at Lummi. So when the president saw my applications, and I had a couple of parents, I said, should I apply for that? And they're like, well, sure. So I got a job then at Northwest Indian College, where I worked for 13 years.
Oh,
And 12 of those, I was the dean for development. So I did grant writing, which is a lot of writing.
I've written some, when I worked at the community college, I wrote some grants. So yes, it's tedious work.
Well, and then I went from there to Everett Community College and worked there about 13 years as their federal grant writer, just
Mm.
solely on federal grants. And so I've had some great work experiences in
Mhm.
parts of our culture in Washington and beyond. And a lot of it to do with writing. While I was at Everett, there were some wonderful poets and writers there that we met with and I still meet with. And
Oh,
yeah, it's a writing lab we do every Wednesday, and now there's about 10 of us.
oh, that's
that-
exciting.
that- Yeah, and that's what's always fed my writing is being with other writers. But anyway, I was taking part in the poetry writing at college and here and there. And one of the people on my hiring committee as grant writer said, we didn't hire you to write poems. We hired you to write grants. I'm like, I'm sorry.
You can't stop me from writing poems too.
I mean, yeah, they don't take 80 hours the way a grant does.
Yes, grants are, I'm glad I didn't have to write too many of them because they're very taxing and you have to follow the rules exactly.
Right. You have to be trained to do it. And if you follow everything exactly, you get funded.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
simple.
Well, that's a really interesting combination of skills that you have compiled over the years. And I'm just wondering if the specificity that you had to have with grant writing has influenced your poetry. And I'm saying that because as I read your poetry, the words, all poetic words, I guess, should be very carefully chosen, but I really feel that you're very careful about the words that you choose.
Well, that's good to hear because I feel like I have a limited vocabulary compared to some of the people I admire, like Priscilla Long. When you read her poetry, the words, I don't know how many unfamiliar words you should actually put into a poem for a general audience. I think maybe you can get away with one or two.
I
I had a hard time convincing my daughter that octopuses is the actual word, not octopi. She says, people are going to wonder if that's true in that poem and it's going to distract them completely, Mom.
too bad for them. They need to be stretched.
So, yeah, what's really important for me in writing is to try to find the images that will hold together and
Yes.
that people can collect as they're going through the poem so that it's specific enough not to be vague. So that's
Well, you know,
what I
William Carlos Williams had a real quarrel with T.S. Eliot for putting so much esoteric and obscure things and requirements to know French and Latin and so forth. And so his poetry brought things back to a very simpler plane. Well, I was enthralled with T.S. Eliot when I was in college, and I like William Carlos Williams too. So I think we just each have to find our own voice. And I don't want to see too many esoteric words. On the other hand, I love interesting words. In fact, I just read one of the piece by Kenneth Meyer, and it had some Pakistani words in it, and I, you know, looked them up and references, and I like being challenged, but I don't think you can do too much.
Well, you have to kind of stay in your own wheelhouse or your boat
Yeah.
will crash on the rocks. And you'll be,
So how would you define your wheelhouse?
well, well, that's an interesting question. I'm sure it has a pretty straightforward answer, which is the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Skagit County. I hiked in the Cascades. I've been out on the water in a sailboat. And so I'm just where I want to be in my writing is right here in the mist, in the clouds that are coming down around your shoulders, and you're going, will there never be sun again?
Were we thinking that much the last couple of weeks?
People around us were, for sure.
Yeah.
And then I've followed some artists in the area. Guy Anderson is one artist that's pretty well known, and Clayton James, who has gone out all around and painted the islands and the sloughs and everything around us. And I'm always exploring what I think those paintings are bringing up is a sense of where we are in the landscape and in the landscape of our own humanness, which has gotten way more interesting in the last, I don't know, 5 years, even what they
more varied, hasn't it?
Yeah, what they know about how our thoughts are running around. I mean, we used to talk about the divided self and the light being, or the brain having activity and a way of looking back at self that could inform a person if it didn't scare you. It tends to create a lot of fear and anxiety in some of us, but if you can kind of bring it out and look at it, and that's what I want poems to do. I want them to kind of let us get that sense of looking closely at what is present and then looking at it again through another kind of lens, the lens of social justice, the lens of family, the lens of I'm just overwhelmed and feeling something I can't explain. That's kind of how I would describe why I write poetry and how it comes to me.
Your poetry does not seem to come from a place of uncertainty and anxiety and angst. There may be aspects of that, but it feels like you may have questions and curiosities, and you want to claim some good from that
Right,
and some description that would resonate in a positive way with people.
right. That's, yeah, you said it perfectly. I couldn't say it any differently.
Well, I've learned some things from you, like that your name only has 6 letters and not 2. No. And sorry, I misspelled it.
Well, you're not alone. Shafer actually has quite a few more letters in it, but my great grandfather took them out.
Oh, did he?
Yes, he thought it fewer letters the better. It happened to a lot of us coming into this
What
country.
what's your ethnic background, just out of curiosity?
Well, my father was German and English, and my mother was Czech and Czech. More Czech.
Oh, well, that would be a subject to mine.
Yeah, it's a great one. The early Czech people lived in Bohemia and North and followed Jan Hus, who 100 years before Luther was saying that there was a direct relationship between God and humans, and forget about the Pope. And he was beheaded. And then the Germans were all in Baden-Baden, which was where Martin Luther was hanging up
Yeah.
his protest. So that's my relatives.
So is there a strain of spirituality in your ancestral kinfolk, would you say?
Oh yeah, there's a strain of Protestant ministers that goes pretty thick.
Mhm.
And that's a large part of my upbringing and the background for how I am who I am.
Mhm.
But I don't think being me is dependent on advocating Christianity out into the world. That would be kind of foolish, since my children are with people who are Muslim and Buddhist. I get to be me with them. That means being wholly open.
Yes. Well, that is sometimes what we learn from our children, and hopefully we have an openness
Yeah, and
before it
they'll
becomes
always correct
necessary.
me, like, Mom, you can't say that. Or like, Mom, stop.
Oh, yeah, I've been taught by my kids and my grandkids and their partners.
Yeah, what's wrong
Yeah,
with saying that?
yeah, yeah.
And so the poems are always a way to explore an idea, trying to open up my own thinking about it and give as much access to people as I can. Like, I've always tried to write for a long time love poems that anybody could find
Mm.
the love.
I think it's lovely to name love poems as something you like to do, because that could mean, so some people would define that so narrowly, and you're not defining it narrowly. You're
Right,
just talking about the expression of love in various ways.
right. Yeah, true. But actual, love poems, like
Yeah, all right.
people being in love with each other and how that feels. But
Yeah.
I've never felt it had to be um, labeled. I want everybody to be confused
Write
about who is
down
the
anybody
person
who's
in love
listening.
here. Because it's not as simple as everybody, well, as I have heard some people say, it's not simple.
Yeah, no, it's not simple. Um, Changing the subject a little bit, Jackstraw Riders. That's
Yes.
a wonderful group to be a part of. Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, there are 12 of us, and we were selected by the mentor, and every year there's a different mentor.
Mm.
And this year's mentor was Priscilla Long.
Mm.
So who gets in? It's kind of like winning the Susie Boynton Poetry
Yeah,
12.
yeah.
It's going to be kind of a crapshoot every year. But I was really fortunate to get into this group, and what it means for me is I get to hang out with some poets I would have never otherwise met. They're amazing and remarkable people, and most of them live in Seattle, although there's one woman here in Bellingham who you may know, Caitlin Tier.
Oh, yes, I do know. She might know, remember me. Yeah, she headed up the writers conference one year. She's really good.
She's an amazing writer.
Yeah.
And they're all amazing in their own way. And one of them was a high school student. The one year I taught high school in Seattle,
Wow.
he was a high school student that year in the school
Really?
teaching.
Oh my gosh.
He wasn't my student. That was too bad because he could have been. He was the right age.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
that's
interesting.
hilarious. But he worked as a editor for the Yakima News. He was an editor and he writes poetry and
Huh.
and then there's a fellow from South Carolina who runs the open mic for the, what's the open mic where you give people a hard time? Oh, what am I trying to say? You can cut
I don't
that
know.
one out and get back to slams. He runs the Seattle
Oh,
Poet.
for slams.
He
Okay.
revived it. And he's
Really?
a fantastic poet. He's got everything you need for he's Black, he's gay, he's a really strong poet, and totally open to what's going on in the Northwest and making us a better place. So, and that's just two of the people. Three, they're all great. And we got some training in how to read your poems. Did you know that when you're writing a poem and that voice that you have that's putting this down to, for whatever reason, to whatever, when you read your poem, you can read it as if you you were performing it, as if it were a thing in its own right to be heard and respected as it's delivered and not as it was written. That's like,
Oh.
yeah, that's like this, and this. It's like, okay, this is what I wrote, but here's performing it. It's very different.
Oh, that's.
We got some coaching on that. We each have a project, and most of them are to come up with a manuscript that can then be published. And Priscilla meets with us at least once a week or twice.
Oh,
every 2 weeks, and kind of goes over. She went over the poems that we submitted, 5 poems for the anthology, and she went over them and took out all the thes. She was very supportive, though. She's just wonderful. What she notices, the way that you've been able to talk about things that show up and should be there.
You always feel that she really knows her stuff.
Yeah.
She's got a scissor-like mind, and she's also kind, which is a great combination.
Yeah. After I got accepted into the program, I was like, oh, Priscilla, I don't know if I should really be here.
I hope we can have another conversation about at the end of this time, at the end of your time with Jack Straw, about what that's been like. You're
well, I'm pretty excited getting to read in Seattle in May, once at Jack Straw and then again at the Folk Life Festival.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who gets to do that? Not very many people.
Not very many. Oh, I'm pleased for you.
I recommend that everybody apply because it's very diverse who they take, and they like
Yeah.
diversity, but apparently being an old white woman in the 21st century is
Yeah,
some
it's
kind of diversity.
it's it's not easy for old white women to be published anywhere or to be accepted anywhere.
Well, that's what we think, and it's our experience. But Priscilla also has a strategy. The goal is to send out 200 poems in a year. It isn't to get any number published, it's just to send them out. The
That's
chances with 200 poems, she says the chances are about 5%, or maybe 1%. No, it was more like 5,
well,
which isn't very many poems, but
it's not very many poems, but if you know that going into it, then you can spend less time on being depressed that you didn't get in.
right, your goal
So
is
that's the way it is.
500 done. I'm halfway through. I'm almost completed.
Yeah,
So
yeah, great.
it's the kind of goal you can meet without getting depressed.
Well, I feel like I've been taught by Carla Shafer today,
I'm
and
learning a lot from you, Linda.
in a very conversational manner. And I would like you now to read 50 or 60 words to close out this interview, and some of your best words. So
You may cut it out, but would you just mind very much if I mentioned the Chuckanet Sandstone Writers Theater, which has been
yes, I have that on my
years.
list.
Yeah, and it's now meeting at Village Books on the second Tuesday at 6 o'clock. And we're having a really fun turnout. It's a really great place to have writers hear each other. So
That started in the 90s, didn't it? Didn't you start that in the 90s?
I think it was 91. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad, because I did have that on my list to ask
Okay.
you about. So thank you.
Well, I think people should have the chance to read what they've done, and you learn more about what you've written if you read it to a group of people. They really can give you a lot of information. This is Madrona Concerto. Imagine yourself as a steadily growing madrona tree, red branches rising from a sturdy brown trunk, the flow of the earth moving through your roots, prying life out of the cracks in granite and sandstone, from the sweet humus below. In this song of yourself, you are the source of all strength and the wisdom of generations. Bend in the breeze, collect sun's heat and the comfort of rain.
That's lovely, Carla.
Thank you.
Thank you for that poem. Thank you for all your poems and for this conversation today.
Yeah. Great work, Linda. Nice work at the Red Wheelbarrow.
Yeah, it's a good organization, and I enjoy it. Look forward to seeing you someplace or another.
Well, come and read at Chuckanet Sandstone. We'd love to have
I might.
Okay.
Thanks.
You
Bye.
bet. Bye-bye.